I recently made a monk endgame video and I didn't think it was possible, but in a matter of a few days we've managed to make it even stronger both offensively and defensively. We've more than doubled our DPS to well over 300k, which is nuts. You can absolutely melt endgame bosses in seconds. And we've managed to solve our defensive issues because we are now immune to chaos damage. Yes, you will no longer get randomly one-shot in maps by purple balls, and we have over 7,500 energy shield and 80% evasion on top. Trust me, you literally will never die anymore. We've even managed to drop our unique ring Pulsarken from the build, but thanks to some clever support gem usage, we are still able to clear entire screens of enemies with the combination of Herald of Ice and Herald of Thunder, so your clear speed will not go down. So if you're new to Monk, let's go over the premise of the build and the key components. If you know all this, then use the timestamps below to get to whichever section you need. Ice Strike is our main attack, which performs successive strikes, the third one being more powerful than the others and applies 80% of our physical damage as cold damage. This allows us to chill and freeze enemies. Charged Staff applies lightning damage to our attacks, which allows us to apply shock to enemies, which is a debuff allowing you to hit enemies for more damage. And then we have Temper Spell, which we drop on stronger enemies like bosses to boost our damage output significantly when spamming Ice Strike. The way we get power charges effortlessly to power Charged Staff is through the skill Combat Frenzy and the passive Keystone Resonance. So every time we freeze or shock an enemy, we now gain power charges. The AoE in this build, where you see me destroy an entire screen of enemies in one hit, requires two things. Herald of Ice, which causes an explosion when you shatter an enemy. Herald of Thunder, which when you kill a shocked enemy brings down lightning. What's changed is that we add lightning infusion to Herald of Ice and cold infusion to Herald of Thunder. On first glance, this seems counterintuitive because we're reducing our damage for both, but now both heralds apply both types of damage and can trigger one another. What this results in is a massive chain reaction where they both keep triggering each other and it clears the whole screen. So good news, you now don't need Pulsarken. Instead, your ring slot is freed up for another rare ring, which provides better offensive stats and even more rarity. Let's talk about how we scale our Ice Strike damage. So for Ice Strike, I'm running Martial Tempo, which gives more attack speed and is giving us roughly 25k DPS. Concentrated Effect, which is giving us nearly a whopping 35k DPS. We have Primal Armament, which is giving us around 23k DPS. We have Ice Bite, which doesn't change the DPS values when you're looking at it in town, but when you are fighting in game, you will freeze enemies and trigger Ice Bite, which for the following 3 seconds will give you a massive damage boost. This is pretty much active 100% of the time when mapping because you're freezing enemies constantly and is a monstrous DPS boost, so do not take this off. And then we finally have Heft, which boosts physical damage and gives us a further 17k DPS. This is the lowest boost, so if you don't have a 6-link gem yet, then drop Heft. Now I know what you're wondering. Mr. Ronnet, you only have 120k DPS here. How do we make this go up to over 300k whilst fighting? Well, I've already mentioned Ice Bite, but the other mechanic we use in this build is Rage. Rage gives us a multiplicative boost to attack damage by 1% per rage up to 30%. Now instead of wasting a support gem and using a rage support gem in the Ice Strike skill, what we now do is we use a Rage Jewel, which gives us 1 rage on hit instead. This way we can still benefit from the other support gems and get rage on top. So once you're fighting in game, if you check your DPS, you can more than double it when you have both Ice Bite and a maximum amount of rage active. Now to really scale your damage, there are 3 further stats you really want to chase within this build, both on your gear and within the passive tree. The first is attack speed. Attack speed is godly for Ice Strike. Attack speed multiplicatively just scales all of our damage bonuses because everything is done faster as a result. And also for Ice Strike, you want to do the third attack more often before you have to dodge or move because that's where the higher damage lies. We can get attack speed through our staff, through our gloves, through our passive nodes, and through our jewels, which I'll discuss a little later. The second 2 stats are critical hit chance and critical hit damage. Both of these stats become more valuable the more you invest into them. The more critical hit chance we have, the more we're going to benefit from critical damage bonus when we do hit enemies for that big critical strike. Now, I really want to mention critical hit damage on your weapon because it's super slept on. So slept on that even I'm missing it from my main weapon here. What a lot of people don't know is that when you're searching for a staff and you sort it by DPS or by physical DPS, critical damage bonus is not included in that calculation for that DPS number. Also, what a lot of people don't know is that this critical damage bonus is a multiplicative boost to critical damage, not additive. So I want to show you 2 weapons to demonstrate this. My main weapon here, which has well-rolled physical damage, attack speed, and elemental damage modifiers with a 10% critical hit chance at base, but no critical damage modifiers. And then with Ice Strike, with this staff, we have 38.39% critical hit chance and 436% critical hit damage bonus. When we equip this second staff here, which has 11.5% critical hit chance and 29% critical damage bonus, we are gaining a multiplicative boost to both values. Our Ice Strike critical hit chance is now 43%, and our critical hit damage bonus has gone up from 436 to 562%, which is an increase of 126%. That is a multiplicative increase and so powerful, especially when you invest more into critical strike chance and critical strike damage on your passive tree. The first staff is superior overall, no doubt. You can see that with the tooltip DPS here for Ice Strike going from 120k to 60k DPS, but the first staff was 1.5 divines, whereas this second staff here I bought for just 1 exalted orb. So what I'm trying to say is look out for expert gothic quarterstaffs with critical damage bonus. They're cheaper than the traditional high physical damage roll crescent quarterstaffs, especially if you add in some elemental DPS on top. To demonstrate this even further, I actually ended up buying a mixed elemental physical staff for 30 exalted orbs. Even though this one has less physical DPS, because it's got some lightning DPS to compensate, it does make up for the damage, but more importantly, it has that critical hit damage bonus. And look, when I equip this, it virtually gives me the same DPS as my other staff, which costs 5 times as much. So let's now talk about defense. We've really tightened up the defense on this build because we use 3 of the strongest defensive layers in PoE 2 at the moment. The first is evasion, because what's better than being hit for damage? Not being hit at all. We managed to gain 80% evasion within the build with a combination of gear and passives. However, evasion has diminishing returns. The more evasion you have, the less percentage chance you get for further evasion at the higher numbers. Also, you will eventually get hit. So you can't purely spec into evasion. You still have to have other defensive layers for when you do get hit. So what we end up doing is we stack energy shield more aggressively in the build. At base currently I have 3750 energy shield. I'm using a lot of hybrid energy shield evasion rating gear. And then on the passive skill tree, I've spec'd more aggressively into energy shield nodes, such as melding, insightfulness, and patient barrier. We can actually double this energy shield to 7500 by using the buff Grim Feast, which lets you overcharge your energy shield to double. So most of the time when mapping, I'm running around with 7,500 ES instead of 3.75k. Finally, we've spec'd into Chaos Inoculation in the build. What this does is it reduces our maximum life to 1, but we're now completely immune to chaos damage. In the endgame, we're able to cap our elemental resistances, fire, cold, and lightning really easily, but capping chaos damage is a pain. With Chaos Inoculation, we don't need to worry about this anymore. Also, there are so many high damage chaos effects whilst mapping, which are the cause of so many one-shots, so it's amazing to not worry about these at all. We can now tank these and not have a sliver of ES taken away. Another benefit of Chaos Inoculation is that because we have 1 health, we are now immune to poison and bleeding damage, which makes things like farming Trials of Chaos for currency so much easier because we can now take chaos damage, poison, and bleeding modifiers with absolutely no consequence. Furthermore, we also take Eternal Youth here, so we can use our health potions to recover ES. Let's go over all of our skilled gems. For Ice Strike, as I mentioned before, I'm running Martial Tempo, Concentrated Effect, Primal Armament, Ice Bite, and Heft. For Temper Spell, run Font of Rage, so on bosses you can get to 30% rage much faster. Font of Mana to help with mana regeneration on bosses especially, and then Close Combat for more attack damage, Heavy Swing for more melee physical damage. For Charged Staff we have Conduction, Persistence, and Overcharge. For Herald of Ice we run Magnified Effect for a greater explosion radius, Lightning Infusion so Herald of Ice now applies lightning damage and can chain trigger Herald of Thunder, and then Lightning Penetration. Herald of Thunder with Cold Infusion so it can chain trigger Herald of Ice. Ambush, as Herald of Thunder often procs on enemies miles away from you on your screen, so it has a good chance of proccing Ambush. And then Long Shot for more damage, as again it hits enemies far away from you. For Combat Frenzy, we have Clarity for more mana regen and Profusion. For Grim Feast, we have Cannibalism for more health regen on kills. For Ghost Dance, we have Fast Forward, so there's less duration between gaining Ghost Shrouds. Then we have Wind Dancer with Culling Strike and Blind. For gear, we've discussed a lot of it already. Staff, you want high physical damage affixes if you can afford it, but sometimes a mix of physical damage and elemental damage can be a good option for cheaper builds. Then look for critical damage bonus because it doesn't get factored into the DPS calculation when searching on trade. It's a very cheap but powerful multiplicative stat as discussed before. Then look for attack speed, elemental damage, and critical hit chance. For my helmet, I went for an evasion and energy shield hybrid helmet that had rarity, critical hit chance, and more evasion and energy shield. For your amulet, you want evasion rating, energy shield, rarity, and the relevant resistances. I anointed High Alert, which gives you even more evasion rating when on full health, which is great for more defense, but I would actually change this to Storm Charge eventually, which gives you more elemental damage and more critical hit chance. It's just that the Essence of Fear required to anoint Storm Charge costs a lot of exalt, so I'm waiting to switch this. The spirit on my amulet is a waste. We don't actually receive any spirit from gear because of this Ascendancy node, which if you have good gear with evasion and energy shield gives you everything you ever need in terms of spirit. For both of your rare rings, look for physical damage, cold damage, both flat and percentage increased cold damage for boosting your overall offensive output. Then look for rarity and resistances. We don't use Pulsarkin anymore as discussed before. My chest piece is a hybrid evasion energy shield piece with maximum life, energy shield and evasion modifiers, and some resistance. The maximum life is a waste because of chaos inoculation, but I've yet to replace it. For your gloves, you want flat physical and cold damage and attack speed, and then slot in some rarity. Your belt is a defensive dump. Look for maximum mana and resistances. For boots, I have an evasion energy shield hybrid with movement speed, energy shield affixes, resistances and rarity. For any piece of gear I've discussed today that feels unaffordable, drop the rarity and the price will be 10x cheaper. Let's go over our passive skill tree, starting off with our Ascendancy nodes. You want to get Lead Me from Grace. This will give you all the spirit you need to be able to use all the buffs in this build. In the endgame, you don't need Protect Me from Harm. Armor doesn't do that much in this game, so that 40% evasion penalty is really unnecessary. Instead, we now get I Am the Blizzard. For more cold damage, this also creates Chill Ground, which can help set up more Herald of Ice explosions. I also get I Am the Thunder for more lightning damage, and then we also get Sunder My Enemies, so critical hits ignore elemental resistances. This means we don't need to run things like Hypothermia anymore, and this node also helps for those tier 15 maps where you get those suffixes which boost enemy resistances. For our passive nodes, there's a real focus on getting attack speed, critical hit chance, and damage nodes, and energy shield nodes. This build is set up for a level 90 player. I've invested quite heavily into critical hit clusters because the more you invest into them, the more value they provide. There's quite a few critical nodes to get: Moment of Truth, True Strike for the Jugular and Deadly Force over here. You have Throat Seeker, these Quarterstaff nodes over here. I will eventually, as I level up, pick up these two critical hit chance nodes as well. These critical hit nodes down here, and then we have the ones up here next to the energy shield nodes, and then finally the ones up here. You'll see in comparison to our previous builds, we've now pathed into Chaos Inoculation, so it makes it mandatory to reach energy shield nodes to boost our defenses. Patient Barrier is a must as it gives a whopping 60% increased energy shield. I've also picked up Melding and Insightfulness for more energy shield. There are other nodes like Spectral Ward, Mindful Awareness, and Inner Faith to really boost your energy shield whilst boosting other stats like Evasion. There's also a couple of attack speed nodes to get, such as Deep Trance, Tenfold Attacks, but we also get attack speed from our Emeralds along with attack damage, critical hit chance. Remember to have a Ruby with Rage on Hit, that is mandatory, and it gives a tremendous damage boost. I think this is a good point to discuss what to do if you're having mana issues. First of all, make sure you have Deep Trance. If it's bossing you have issues with in terms of mana, make sure you're running Font of Mana on Tempest Spell. If it's mapping you're struggling with, then you can use a percentage mana on Kill Gem. A single one with a 2% roll will help a ton. Finally, if you're struggling even then you have to lose some DPS by taking off Heft, and then you want to replace it with Inspiration, which will lower mana costs. That will definitely solve all your mana issues, but it is the biggest DPS loss from all the options I've explained. And then finally for my Atlas, I have Constant Crossroads for more Waystone drops, Lucky Pillage for more drops and better drops, Fortunate Path for better quality Waystones, Twin Threats so maps have more rare monsters, Deadly Evolution so rares have more modifiers, which makes them harder to kill, but it does make them drop more and better loot. Unstable Energies, which has a chance to make our Waystones 25% better or sometimes 25% worse, but it's worth the gamble. Remnants of Power, so Precursor Tablets have a small chance to have double effect. And finally, Precursor Influence for more Precursor Tablet drops. So there you have it, my final endgame guide to the Ice Strike Monk. We really fix all of our survivability issues with this iteration, and we maximize our DPS so you can conquer the endgame with ease. If you enjoyed what I talked about today, remember to smash the like button and subscribe to the channel for more Path of Exile build guides. I'm Mr. Ronnet, and that's it for today. Peace out, guys.